You don't have a broken brain, you have an inflamed gut. If you show up here exhausted but wired, with fuzziness in your head, anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, and a stomach that never feels quite right, this video is for you. For years we've been told the story. Depression and anxiety are just chemical imbalances in the brain, and the answer is a pill. That's a comforting, simple story, but it is incomplete. When we treat the brain as if it's isolated, we miss the rest of the body that's talking to it every second, especially your gut. The feelings you call butterflies, that sudden drop in your stomach before a presentation, the way your mind fogs after a big meal, those aren't metaphors. They're biology. Your gut is not just digestion. It houses its own nervous system, the enteric nervous system, with roughly 500 million neurons. Think of it as a second brain that runs automatically and constantly reports back to your head. And here's a fact that surprises people. About 95% of your body's serotonin, a neurotransmitter often tied to mood and sleep, is made in your gut, not in the brain. So if your gut chemistry is off, your brain chemistry will feel the effects. Remember the last time you were nervous and felt your stomach flutter? That's the gut talking to the brain through the vagus nerve, a literal information superhighway. It's why stress tightens the belly, and why a gut that isn't happy can make your thoughts feel foggy, jittery, or flat. The phrase chemical imbalance became shorthand, but it leads to a one-size-fits-all approach. Medicate and move on. That works for some people, but not for everyone. If you're constantly tired, anxious, bloated, or sleepless despite trying conventional options, there's a high probability the missing piece is happening down in your digestive tract. Inflammation, an unhappy microbiome, or a leaky gut that's fueling systemic inflammation. When the gut lining becomes irritated or more permeable, bits of food, microbes, and toxins can cross into the bloodstream. Your immune system responds. That immune activity produces cytokines, small signaling proteins, that travel to the brain and change how neurons communicate. The result? Slower thinking, fatigue, mood swings, even heightened anxiety. In short, inflammation in the gut can look exactly like a broken brain. If this resonates, good. That recognition is the first step. This is not about blaming your mind or saying you're imagining things. Symptoms are real, measurable, and treatable. Over the next minutes, I'll explain the anatomy, how the gut and brain connect, what leaky gut really means, and a step-by-step protocol to calm inflammation and restore clarity. But first, understand this core idea. To fix your mind, start with your gut. Welcome back. In this section, we're going to look under the hood, the actual anatomy of your second brain and why it matters for anxiety, brain fog, and that constant tired but wired feeling. This is where the science stops sounding like metaphor and starts sounding like a clear wiring diagram you can work with. The gut has its own nervous system, the enteric nervous system, or ENS. It contains roughly 500 million neurons, neurotransmitters, and local reflexes that control digestion, blood flow, and local immune responses. The ENS runs many functions automatically, and it talks constantly with your head. It's not poetic to call the gut a second brain, it's literal. Connecting those two brains is the vagus nerve, a thick cable of nerves that runs from the brainstem down into your chest and abdomen. Importantly, roughly 70–80% of the signals on that cable are coming from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. That means your gut is doing a lot of the reporting. If the gut is calm, it sends calming signals. If the gut is noisy, the brain hears it. This is how a rumble in your belly becomes a racing heart or a fogged mind. Now meet the microbiome, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and microbes living along your digestive tract. Think of them as a neighborhood pharmacy that manufactures hundreds of small molecules every day. Short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that feed your intestinal cells, B vitamins, precursors to neurotransmitters, and even molecules that nudge your immune system. Some friendly microbes help produce or influence GABA, the brain's natural brake pedal, and others help modulate dopamine pathways related to reward and motivation. When that pharmacy is healthy and diverse, it supplies calming, stabilizing chemistry and keeps the gut lining intact. But what happens when that pharmacy is burned down? Chronic stress, a diet high in ultra-processed foods and sugar, antibiotics, and poor sleep all favor fast-growing inflammatory microbes and reduced diversity. Imagine your calming, carefully stocked pharmacy replaced by a convenience store that only sells energy shots and cheap stimulants. More cravings, more jitteriness, less balance. Those harmful microbes produce inflammatory signals and metabolites like lipopolysaccharide, LPS, that irritate the gut lining and shout down the vagus nerve with distress signals. Two concrete examples. Certain Lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains help produce GABA or encourage its production, which can lower anxiety. Other microbes influence serotonin precursors and short-chain fatty acids that support brain and barrier health. Lose those helpful strains and you lose a steady supply of mood-supporting chemistry. It's like pulling the batteries out of your calming system. Remember that this is a two-way street. The brain influences gut motility, mucus production, and local immunity via stress hormones. The gut feeds back through microbial metabolites and the vagus nerve. Those feedback loops can lock you into patterns. Chronic stress shifts the microbiome. The microbiome reduces calming molecules and increases inflammatory signals. Inflammation and altered neurotransmission worsen anxiety and cognitive fog, increased stress. Breaking this loop is the goal. So when I tell patients, your anxiety isn't purely in your head, this is what I mean. Your gut's nervous system, its microbial pharmacy, and the vagus nerve are major determinants of how calm, focused, or anxious you feel. The good news? We can act on the gut. We can rebuild the pharmacy, calm the vagus signal, and give your brain the chemistry it needs to think clearly and feel steady. Up next, I'll show you what happens when that system breaks down, the leaky gut story, and then how to repair it step by step. Now we're going to walk into the one place most people never consider when they talk about mood or thinking: the intestinal barrier, the thin lining between what's inside your gut and what's supposed to stay out of your bloodstream. I call this chapter the silent killer because when the gut barrier breaks down, it quietly fuels inflammation throughout the body, including the brain. And that inflammation looks a lot like the very symptoms people bring to me: brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, poor sleep, and food sensitivities. Imagine your intestinal lining as a cheesecloth, fine enough to let nutrients through, but tight enough to keep larger, unwanted particles out. Under normal conditions, that cheesecloth is intact. Nutrients are absorbed, microbes stay in the gut, and the immune system mostly stands down. But when the cheesecloth develops holes, from stress, poor diet, medications, or infections, larger particles, undigested proteins, bacterial fragments, slip through into the bloodstream. That's increased intestinal permeability, commonly called leaky gut. The gut lining is made of epithelial cells joined by little protein zippers called tight junctions. These tight junctions open and close as part of normal physiology. One of the molecules that controls those gates is zonulin, a physiological regulator of tight junctions. When zonulin is upregulated, the gates loosen and permeability increases. Zonulin's role as a master regulator of these tight junctions is supported in fundamental research and clinical studies. When those gates open too wide, bacterial components such as lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, a molecule on the outer membrane of certain gram-negative bacteria, can translocate into the bloodstream. LPS is highly immunogenic. The immune system recognizes it as foreign and mounts an inflammatory response. That peripheral immune activation releases cytokines, signaling proteins like IL-6 and TNF-A, which travel systemically and can affect the brain. Animal and experimental models show that peripheral LPS can trigger brain inflammation and activate microglia, the brain's immune cells. This is one of the clearest mechanistic links between gut-derived inflammation and altered brain function. Those circulating cytokines and inflammatory signals alter neurotransmitter metabolism, reduce the availability of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, in some settings, disturb sleep, and can change the blood-brain barrier's behavior, making the brain more sensitive to inflammatory stimuli. The result is the exact set of symptoms many of you feel: slowed thinking, poor concentration, fatigue that doesn't respond to sleep, and heightened reactivity or anxiety. Large clinical reviews tie increased intestinal permeability to systemic inflammation and a range of chronic conditions, which helps explain why gut problems often present as cognitive and mood symptoms. So, what tears the cheesecloth? There are several common and often reversible culprits: chronic psychological stress, frequent NSAID use, ibuprofen, naproxen, excess alcohol, high intake of ultra-processed foods and emulsifiers, certain infections, repeated antibiotic courses, and nutritional deficiencies, for example, low zinc, all of which are linked to increased gut permeability in the literature. It's important to be clear: leaky gut as a shorthand isn't a precise medical diagnosis in all contexts. Mainstream medicine debates definitions and standardized testing. But the core biology of intestinal permeability, zonulin regulation, LPS translocation, and downstream immune activation is well described in peer-reviewed research. For patients, that means symptoms are real and there are measurable pathways we can act on. Tests like lactulose, mannitol permeability assays, stool microbiome analysis, and zonulin measurements are used by clinicians, but each has limitations and must be interpreted in context. Clinically, I see a pattern. People come in with chronic bloating, fluctuating energy, and anxiety. They often also have food sensitivities or skin issues. When we look deeper, many of these patients show signs of dysbiosis, microbial imbalance, and biomarkers of immune activation. Treating the gut barrier, calming inflammation, and reseeding helpful microbes often reduces the cognitive and emotional symptoms as much as, and sometimes more than, medications alone. The big takeaway here: your gut lining's integrity matters. Fixing the gut lining reduces the traffic of inflammatory molecules into the blood, dampens immune activation, and gives your brain the chance to calm down and think clearly again. In the next section, I'll lay out a practical, step-by-step repair protocol: how to remove triggers, support the lining, and repopulate the microbiome so you can reclaim focus, energy, and calm. But first, if you've been relying heavily on NSAIDs, alcohol, or a lot of processed packaged foods, make a mental note. Those are the first things to address. Now for the part most people want: the repair protocol. This is practical, concrete, and built from physiology. Remove what's tearing the lining, give the lining the building blocks to heal, and then repopulate the gut with the microbes that support calm, clear thinking. I break it down into 3 simple steps: remove, repair, repopulate. Start by removing the most common controllable offenders that keep the gut inflamed. For most people, that means cutting back on refined sugar and ultra-processed foods, significantly reducing alcohol, and temporarily removing common offenders like gluten if you suspect sensitivity. Also, pause frequent NSAID use when possible and talk to your clinician about alternatives. Do this consistently for at least 4-8 weeks to give the lining time to start sealing. In practice, that looks like whole food meals, steady protein, non-starchy vegetables, and swapping sweets for fruit and fiber. Removing triggers reduces the ongoing immune activation. Fewer inflammatory cytokines, less zonulin signaling, and fewer insults to the tight junctions. That's the first step in stopping new holes from forming. While you remove triggers, support the epithelial cells that make up the barrier. Nutrients that help include adequate protein, collagen or bone broth, rich in glycine and proline, L-glutamine, an amino acid many practitioners use to support enterocytes, zinc for tight junction integrity, and plenty of short-chain fatty acids, either produced by microbes or supported with resistant starch and fiber. Practically, 1 daily serving of bone broth or 10-20 g collagen peptides in a smoothie, a zinc-rich food source or supplement as advised by your clinician, and plenty of colorful vegetables and soluble fiber. Slow and steady is the goal. Give the lining the substrate it needs to rebuild. Once the environment is calmer and the lining is supported, the third step is repopulation, reseeding your internal pharmacy with the strains that produce calming metabolites, GABA, short-chain fatty acids, B vitamins, and outcompete inflammatory microbes. This is often the missed step in many recovery plans. Fermented foods, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, targeted prebiotics, inulin-resistant starch, and a high-quality probiotic can help repopulate microbial communities. Modern life, stress, antibiotics, low-fiber diets, and ultra-processed food preferentially remove certain lean, metabolically helpful bacteria, including strains in the Lactobacillus family, such as Lactobacillus Gasseri, which research links to better metabolic signaling and reduced cravings in some contexts. For people who want a targeted clinical-grade reseed, I often discuss adjuncts like LeanBiome, a formulation designed to reintroduce specific, clinically studied strains and support reduced inflammation and cravings when used as part of a broader protocol. Importantly, supplements are an adjunct, not a replacement for removing triggers and repairing the lining first. Start slowly. Introduce 1 serving of fermented food every other day, add a prebiotic fiber in small amounts to avoid bloating, and consider a targeted probiotic for 8-12 weeks while monitoring symptoms. If you choose a supplement, look for clinically described strains, third-party testing, and a brand transparent about colony-forming units, CFUs, and storage. Always check with your clinician if you're immunocompromised or on multiple medications. You may feel small improvements in energy and clarity in 2-4 weeks, but meaningful shifts in microbiome composition and barrier integrity usually take 8-12 weeks. This protocol is cumulative. Remove the ongoing insult, feed the cells that make the barrier, then reseed the microbiome so the second brain can begin making the chemistry you need to feel calm and focused again. No single pill fixes everything. The best outcomes come from combining lifestyle changes, sleep, stress management, food quality, with specific interventions that target the gut lining and microbiome. If you follow these 3 steps, remove, repair, repopulate, you're giving your body the best chance to quiet inflammation and restore clear thinking. Up next, practical daily tips you can use immediately to lock these gains in. If you've stayed with me this far, here's what I want you to understand. Your anxiety, your brain fog, your exhaustion, they are not personal failures. They are physiological signals. And very often those signals are coming from your gut. You now understand the full arc. The gut has its own nervous system. It produces the majority of the body's serotonin. It communicates constantly with the brain through the vagus nerve. When the microbiome is disrupted and the gut barrier becomes permeable, inflammation travels upstream, and the brain pays the price. But here's the empowering part. If the gut can drive the problem, it can also drive the solution. Let me leave you with 3 simple practical habits you can start this week to lock in the repair protocol. Tip #1. Add fermented foods, daily microdoses of good bacteria. Think of fermented foods as gentle, daily reinforcements for your internal pharmacy. 1 small serving per day, a forkful of sauerkraut, a cup of kefir, a spoonful of kimchi, can introduce beneficial microbes and support microbial diversity. Start small to avoid bloating. Consistency matters more than quantity. Tip #2. Strategic fasting. Let the gut clean itself. Your digestive system has its own cleaning cycle called the migrating motor complex. It activates between meals and helps sweep debris and excess bacteria down the tract. Constant snacking interrupts it. Try a simple 12-14-hour overnight fasting window. Finish dinner at 7 p.m., eat breakfast at 9 a.m. This gives your gut time to repair, reset, and reduce inflammatory load. Tip #3. Calm the vagus nerve, regulate before you react. If 70-80% of vagus nerve signals travel from the gut to the brain, we can influence that pathway. Slow breathing, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, for 5 minutes can stimulate vagal tone. Cold water on the face, humming, singing, prayer, meditation, and slow walks in nature all activate this pathway. When the vagus nerve is calm, the brain interprets safety, and safety reduces inflammation. Now I want you to visualize something. Picture your gut lining sealed and intact, your microbiome diverse and balanced, your vagus nerve sending slow, steady signals of safety, your brain clear, thoughts sharp, mood stable, energy steady throughout the day. That's not fantasy, that's physiology when inflammation drops. If you choose to use targeted tools like LeanBiome to help reseed specific strains, remember, supplements amplify good habits. They don't replace them. The foundation is always food quality, stress regulation, sleep, and consistency. And here's the final thought I want you to carry with you. Trust your gut. Literally. Your body is not confused. It's communicating. When you listen to it and support it, clarity returns. Calm returns. Energy returns. If this helped you understand your symptoms in a new way, share it with someone who needs to hear that their brain isn't broken. And if you're ready to start repairing your gut, begin with one step today. Remove one trigger, add one supportive habit. Small changes done consistently rebuild the second brain. This video is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. The concepts discussed, including intestinal permeability, microbiome support, fasting, and supplementation, should not replace personalized medical evaluation. If you are pregnant, nursing, immunocompromised, taking prescription medications, or have a diagnosed medical or psychiatric condition, consult your qualified healthcare provider before making changes. Do not discontinue prescribed medications without medical supervision. Individual responses vary, and no supplement is intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Take care of your gut, and your gut will take care of you.